So I want us to think this morning about what it means to be called. What does it mean to be called? It's actually something, interestingly enough, that when I speak to my Christian colleagues, they talk about being called all the time. Any of our Christian colleagues who are in the clergy, right, for Rabbi Ern and myself, they ask each other, when did you get the call, right? When did you hear that call to say, you need to do this, you need to devote your life to that? We don't really speak about that in the same way in the rabbinate, right? We don't talk about the call. We can, but we don't. It's not the language that we use. And so I want to push us a little bit this weekend, or this Shabbat, because I'm going to argue that the language of being called is very much a Jewish thing. And that's how this week's Torah portion starts. That's how this book of the Torah starts, Vayikra. And if you turn to page 585 in your red Chumashim, you will see Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor. The first pasuk, God called to Moses, Vayikra, and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, and then we're going to go into a very detailed explanation for the next number of chapters of all the different sacrifices. But the rabbis pick up on something here. They pick up on the double use of the words to call or to speak, right? It sort of indicates that God is speaking to Moses twice. First, God called to Moses, and then God spoke to Moses, right? Vayikra, God called to Moses, and then Vayidaber, and he spoke. Normally, it just says, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses saying. So what is the purpose, the rabbis ask, of this Vayikra, of the call? Let's talk about that. That's what I want to talk about today. What do you think? What is the purpose of this call? What does it mean to be called? Good, Mark. So one of the uses of a call is to get someone's attention, right? When you're speaking, the assumption is both people are involved in the conversation. That's not always true, but the assumption is, right? You're already there. You're already involved in the conversation. But the call is to get your attention, is to draw your attention into that moment so that you can have the conversation. So maybe that's what's going on here, right? That Moshe wasn't there, wasn't paying attention, was distanced in somehow. We're going to get back to that. And God is saying, wait a second, I need to talk to you. So the first moment is to get Moshe's attention, and then we go off. Good. What else? Uh-huh. I like that, right? A call sounds different sometimes than just a regular conversation, right? What you said when you're trying to get your kid's attention, right? Instead of, for my child, instead of just saying Michael, it's Michael Hirsch, you know? That gets his attention, and it lets him know, hey, something's going on that I better be focusing on. So those two ideas go together very well. I like that. Yeah. A lot of the beginnings of these parshiot are trying to move us from one place to another, right? Taking us to the next level, right? Is what you said, and so we have to try and make sense of all of these sacrifices, and so maybe this is a way that God is indicating, you know, it's not just about the face value of this, right? It's not just about, okay, go grab an animal, sacrifice it because I want it, right? God doesn't need the sacrifices. There's another reason for the sacrifices, and it elevates us in a way. And so maybe this is, and a lot of the verses or the verbs that we have in the beginning of these parshiot kind of do that, whether it's tzav, whether it's tazria, whatever it may be. Good. What does it mean to be called? Let's put it in that framework, right? We're talking about what the purpose of a call is, but now what does it mean to be called? You have a job to do, right? You have a job to do. And you may or may not have known that beforehand, right? So maybe the call is reminding you to do the job you're supposed to be doing. Maybe the call is giving you that information at the beginning because you're not even aware of what it is. You've got a job to do. Good.
Well, also, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but Vayikra can also mean a lot of things. Like to call something is to name something, and we see this. I picked this up from Rabbi Kasher that like Vayikra, he called the day, the first day. He called. What was it that it says? God called the light day, and then he called out to Moshe, and then also Pharaoh's daughter called him Moshe. So it can also be the act of naming something. But I think what's particularly salient about this particular Vayikra is the little olive that's in the Torah. I don't know if you're going to...
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, unless you can see in the Torah, it's hard to see it. Is it? Oh, it does. Good. So if you look, thank you. If you look at the very first word, you'll see there's a small aleph at the end of Vayikra.
And there's so much that's been, seas of ink had been spilled about this tiny little olive from like this very high level like thing about infinity, which I had to ask Michael Frank to explain to me. But really, that olive shows that it's small. I like this one that it shows the humility
Yeah.
of Moshe. He's small. We're all smaller than God who's doing the calling.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the rabbis take this, it's a peculiarity, it's a particular, a piece in the Torah that has this tradition of writing the Aleph Ze'ira, this small Aleph, and a lot of rabbis have written about what that means from a spiritual level, from a practical level, from a lot of different ways, and it does. I think it talks about the humility. It talks about that. Rashi does something very interesting with this. Rashi says as follows: L'chol devarot u'l'chol amirot u'l'chol tzivuyim kedma kriya l'shon chiba, which means anytime you see the language of speaking or saying or command prefaced with the word kara, right, with a call, it is lashon chiba. It is a term of endearment. It's a term of love. It's a term of bringing close. Now, what's interesting is why does God feel the need here to begin Vayikra by bringing Moshe close? Okay.
So he first has to bring Moshe, like, get him into the game. It's like, come on in. It's like, tell him, it's like giving your quarterback the plays, you know? So you call him in, you tell him what you need to do. Then he goes out, and then he says, now speak to the children of Israel and tell them all of this. So it's to create closeness, but you have to start somewhere, so.
Okay, so the whole idea of korban, right? The word we use for sacrifice comes from the word karov, to bring close, to bring near. And so Diana's arguing maybe before we start talking about korbanot, we have to bring Moshe close. God wants to start by saying, this is how you do it. Let me show you. Let me bring you close. Okay?
Curious, how much closer could Moshe be than he was?
Ah.
You can't, and the second thing, maybe he's saying that God's telling us we're going to shift gears here. Now we're showing you how you are holy, how you make me holy. It's a shift in gears.
I like that. How much closer can Moshe be? Of anybody, right? Moshe is the closest. And yet, let's just see how the end of the book of Exodus read. Let's turn back to page 571 for a moment. Let's look at the very last part of Exodus. I'm looking at the Maftir Aliyah, right? The end of verse 33. When Moses finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moshe could not enter the tent because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The book of Exodus leaves Moshe literally on the outside. Literally on the outside, right? God came down, filled. This was Moshe had spent all of this time building this tabernacle with the people. And instead of being invited in, so to speak, Moshe was on the outside. And Vayikra Rabbah, one of the Midrashim, picks up and he says, this is like a king who commands his servant to say to him, build me a palace. On every item that the servant had built, he would write the name of the king. And he put up the walls, and he wrote the name of the king. And he set up the columns, and he wrote the name of the king. And he established the beams, and he wrote on them the name of the king. And finally, when the king had entered the palace and saw everything he laid his eye on contained his name, he said, all this glory my servant made for me, but alas, I am inside, and now he is outside. It's a recognition here of a distance that is between we as human beings and God. For as much as we want to bring God into this world, for as much as we want to have a place where we can say, this is where God is, we can't be in that same exact place as God. It's impossible for us. And so there's this recognition, there's a reality of a distance between us. Even when we create these spaces, when we make these holy places for ourselves to be and for God to dwell, there's still a distance. And so now, on that comes the korbanot, comes these offerings, these sacrifices. And it's as if God is saying, okay, let me figure out a way for you to approach me, for you to come close. Right? That's korban, to come close. Let me figure out a way to have a relationship. But it starts with God saying, come closer. Come closer. It's okay. Moshe, I know you're feeling on the outside. Come closer. And that's why I think Rashi picks up on this and says it's language of affection, right? It's language of affection, of God saying, I haven't forgotten about you. And let's not forget, by the way, that throughout most of Vayikra, Moshe is secondary, right? It's Aaron that is the focus of most of the book of Vayikra. Because Aharon and the priesthood are the ones that are going to be doing these sacrifices. Moshe isn't involved in the sacrifices. And so not only is this all of a sudden a place that Moshe can't enter, but it's not even a place that Moshe has a part anymore. So Vayikra, God called. God saying, welcome, come on in. I read a wonderful, I'm trying to find out who wrote this. Hold on a second. I will tell you in a second. This is Rabbi Dr. Aaron Leib Smokler, who is the Dean of Students and the Mashgicha Ruchanit at Yeshivat Maharat, which is an Orthodox-based yeshiva that is training women to be rabbis. Yeshivat Maharat. And she is one of the lead rabbis on this. And she wrote a beautiful Dvar Torah on this. And she writes as follows. So God calls to Moshe, B'lashon Chiba, with a language of affection, as Moshe hovers on the outside of the Mishkan, full of fear perhaps, or humility or discomfort. Do not step away, she writes, from the God space that you created, God indicates, but step into it. It's your place too. It's our place, even the inner sanctum. And she starts to take this into a very interesting place. Not just the physical locations, like a synagogue, right? And part of what we need to do as a community is to speak with that lashon chiba, the language of affection, and say, Vayikra, this is your space too. Come, be here, right? That's part of it. But it's also the inner places that we create. It's those inner holy spots that we build that sometimes we actually get afraid of, that sometimes we are reluctant to go into, sometimes we forget about, because life has gotten so busy, we're working, we're doing our thing, and we forget about these spaces, and every once in a while, we need to hear that call to say, come back, come here, visit, right? Be part of that. And I think that's where this Parsha begins. And the entire book of Vayikra is about that. We then translate korbanot, offerings, in different ways today. We can't offer the way that we used to. Many of us don't want to offer the way that we used to. That's the big conversation, right? When the Messiah comes and the third temple is rebuilt, our sacrifice is going to start up again. There's a big division of opinion in the rabbinic world, right? Some say, well, of course, right? That's the purpose of the temple, is to be there and to offer sacrifices and to have that. Other people say, actually, no, we've evolved beyond that. Those korbanot was the way we expressed our closeness to God in a world in which sacrifice was the norm. But we today as Jews express our closeness to God in different ways. And that is going to continue to be the focus of who we are when that third temple is rebuilt, they argue. I don't know. We'll see when it happens, right? But certainly for us now, right, we're not offering those sacrifices. So the question is, what are the things that we do, that we are being called to do to bring ourselves close to God, to find those moments of connection, even when we feel like Moshe did at the end of Exodus, well, there's no room for me here. There's no place. It's all God. It's all everything else. Like, where do I fit in? God is reminding Moshe that, yeah, you do. You fit in, and welcome. Shabbat Shalom.